Welcome to Mary McCorvey Experience Over Expectations podcast, which you can find on YouTube, Substack, and any place you find your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe today.
Welcome to Experience Over Expectation, where we ask people to let go of the plan and live on their own terms. Our guest today is Jeff Sorensen, who is a transformational leader, international facilitator, speaker, and co-author of the best-selling book, Ignite Your Inner Spirit. He's also the founder of Breath Army and the Light Force Training Academy, where he helps leaders and emerging visionaries break through the self-imposed barriers that keep them small, stuck, or silent. Jeff's work is grounded in nearly 2 decades of helping people move through trauma, reclaim their voice, and step into a more aligned, awakened way of living. Jeff is a guide for those who are ready to remember who they really are. Thank you, Jeff, so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Mary. I'm really happy to be here.
Well, I'm really curious to know what remembering yourself means.
Well, I think culturally that we are in a period of amnesia to some degree, and we've forgotten who we are, and we've forgotten our true potential and our true nature. And so for me, remembering who we are is about recognizing that we're not the labels that we give ourselves, and that there's a spark of something within us that is so much greater and so much vaster and so much more capable than we have thought ourselves to be. And so for me, it's about stepping out of the mind and to really connect with the potential that lies within each of us, and recognizing that I'm not just Jeff Sorensen that grew up in Revelstoke in a family of 4 with a dog named Baloo, that there's an element of me that is much grander than that, and that we are all connected, and that we're not separate from one another. And I think there is a paradox within the human experience, and we've been identified with the labels, thinking that's who we are, whether it's maybe the ADHD or the PTSD or the anxiety or the depression or the facilitator or the speaker or the writer or whatever it is. And that is our experience that we're having, and that will always be changing. And yet there's an element of us that I believe is eternal, and that extends far beyond the labels. And when we connect to that, we connect to our true potential. And we're capable of so much more than we thought that we were capable of.
What is the genesis of your movement?
Yeah, well, it's, as I'm sure all your guests have, it's a long story. And yet I like to take people back to a particular time in my life, and it was October 23rd, 2003. And I was looking at my body as it was lying in the back of an ambulance. And I'm looking down at my body, and the nurse in the back, and the ambulance are just absolutely covered in blood. And I'm drifting further and further away. And I hear a voice in my mind that says to me, you can keep drifting off, or you can go back, but there will be a lot of suffering if you do. And yet in that moment, there was a knowing within me that I needed to go back, and that I still had something to do with my life. And instantly, I'm back in my body. I rip off the straps on the spine board, and I sit up and I yell at the paramedics, take me back to the hospital. because I knew that I wasn't going to survive the transport to the ICU that was over 2 hours away. And so, flash forward, I'm back living my life, but the pain and the injuries from the accident are so bad. They're piled on top of this mountain of childhood trauma. And I'm on oxys and benzos and SSRIs, and I'm also partying and self-medicating with drugs and alcohol. And so every day is just like Groundhog Day. I wake up in the morning, I swallow back a handful of pills with some leftover booze from the night before, and I'm trying to chalk up a rail of cocaine off the table with the leftovers from the night before. And at that point, my life is a complete disaster. My relationships are a disaster. I'm completely lost, feel hopeless, suicidal. And yet I'm living this bad boy kind of gangster lifestyle. And eventually it leads me to Mexico. And I meet a man that works for the Sinaloa cartel. And eventually, at a point of desperation, I accept their invitations to start working for the cartel.
Or as
And
a drug
eventually,
dealer?
as a drug trafficker.
A drug trafficker.
Right.
Okay.
And so eventually I quit working for the cartel, but I get convinced to go back and do that one last run.
Oh boy.
And it was a setup. And so I was busted by the Mexican military, and I was thrown in jail for what threatened to be a 10 to 25-year sentence. And the only thing that I really cared about at that point in my life were my dogs. And they were staying with a friend of mine while I'm locked in a concrete cell with 1 hour a week out in the yard where we could talk to people on the outside. And so I'll never forget phoning my friend Bibi, who is taking care of my dogs. And when she picked up the phone, she says to me, "Jeffrey, I'm so sorry. Harmon was killed by another dog's owner after they got in a fight. I'm so sorry." And so the guilt that I felt from losing the most important thing to me in my life at that point and from leaving her behind just felt absolutely devastating. And so we get called back into line, filed back up into the cell, and I get squashed back into the 11-foot by 11-foot cell with 30 other men. And I'm sitting in the corner meditating, and I sat for days trying to process that grief and the emotions that I was feeling. And Carmen's image is just burned in my mind. Big brown eyes, or cute floppy ears, or just standing there wagging her tail and just overcome with grief. And all of a sudden, I realize that I don't need to suffer anymore, and that suffering is truly optional, and that I'm free. And so
How did you discover that? I mean, what
it was,
was it like manna from heaven, or I mean, what you're describing is very, a destitute kind of situation. And then
yeah,
all of a sudden, there was this wonderful insight that you got. It probably wasn't wonderful at the time, but it 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 gave
it
you
was
the wherewithal.
wonderful.
It was wonderful. It was filled with wonder.
It was liberating. It
Oh,
liberated me in that moment. And I was free from that suffering that was so intense in that space, in, conditions that of course, there's always worse, but very challenging
They're
conditions.
very bad conditions, yes.
And it was, I think the best way to describe it, it was a moment of realization. And another way to say realization is to know. And it
Yes.
was an inner gnosis in that it wasn't an intellectual understanding. We've all heard that, suffering is optional. You don't need to suffer. But it was a deep felt sense that I experienced. And in that was liberation.
And how did you get out of the prison? I mean, you weren't
Well,
there for
so
25 years, were you?
no, I wasn't. So 2 years after I landed there, I was released early by what we could call good luck. And in Spanish, they call it el favor de Dios, the favor of God. And so I returned back to Canada and started to rebuild my life. And I was able to travel the world and study with some of the best known names in breath and cold and meditation and yoga and plant medicine and trauma healing. And I was able to start to live my dreams again. And now that's what I help other people do. I was able to experience that true freedom from within. And that's what I share with other people in the world.
So this sounds like you took ownership of your life, that you lost control for a while after, we think about near-death experiences as being revelatory for sure. But, what happened with you when you came back was a lot of pain and suffering that continued through several years, right?
Yeah.
And then in that moment filled with wonder, you took ownership of your suffering. And when you got out, you pursued this path. Tell us more about ownership.
Yeah. The radical ownership piece actually started years prior to landing in jail. And when I first got to Mexico, I'd landed there in an RV park. And, I was parked on the beach and living in my RV. And I had driven over 8,000 kilometers from where I lived, across Canada, down through the States, down into Mexico. And before I left, I had been talking to my best friend on the phone while I was in the depths of my addiction. And, I'm in this state of paranoia and panic, and he wants to come and get me to go and stay with him, to go and get clean. And the problem with that is he's a drug dealer. But, he's not just a drug dealer. This guy's a boss, and he's
Right.
got his own helicopter. His house is full of drugs. And so I tell him, no, I'm not going with you. I need to get far away from here. I don't know where I'm going, but I just got to get out of here. And so he says to me on the phone, he says, okay, well, if you go far away and everything stays the same, you'll know it was you. So a little over a year later, I'm living in my RV, parked on the beach in Mazatlan. I'm strung out on crack cocaine. And I'm peeking out the blinds and I'm convinced that the world's out to get me. I'm in this state of paranoia again. And I just walk past the mirror and I see myself in the mirror and I look at myself and I'm just skinny, hollow-eyed, strung out. And his words are echoing in my mind. You'll know it was you. And I had run all of that way, thinking that I could get away from myself,
Mm.
essentially. And again, there was just this knowing at that point that there was nowhere else to run, that there was no one else to blame except for myself, that I needed to take radical ownership for my life. And in doing that, by claiming and owning responsibility for everything that I had created in my life, then I also reclaimed the power to start reshaping my life. And so I believe that that comes in stages. You know, we don't just magically change everything in one moment. You know, I think we make decisions, we put things in action, and it's kind of like ripples in a pond, you know, as they slowly start to peter out after this, you know, this rock is thrown in the water, and it takes time for it to smooth out. And so years later, I'm still dealing with the repercussions of the decisions that I had made to run away and go to Mexico and leave everything behind, and, you know, take what money I had. And eventually it led me to a point where I didn't have enough money to keep going. I didn't have enough money to pay my rent at the restaurant I was running at that point. I didn't have enough money to pay the rent at my house. And so I'd met this man that worked for the cartel. I made that decision, you know, to do that one last run. And so when I landed in prison, there was a clear sense that I was exactly where I was supposed to be in
Mm-hmm.
this path of learning. And it was a tough lesson. But again, there was an opportunity to take radical ownership for where I was and the situation I had created. And in doing that and really embodying self-mastery in my time there, I had already been a yoga teacher for years at that point, you know, and I was kind of living this double life of being a yoga teacher, running a restaurant, and then running away every once in a while to go and do a trip for the cartel. And through that radical ownership, through embodying self-mastery, through these different practices, again, I was able to reclaim that power to create within my life and to really choose what path I took forward and not to be overcome by the situation I was in, not to be defined by it, and to find my way out of that situation that I'd created and placed myself in.
Mm. And how would you take, because thankfully most of us have not been in your situation.
Mm-hmm.
Many people have. They've been in accidents. They've found themselves addicted to drugs. They've done things that they didn't want to do. There were repercussions that they didn't want. There are lots of people that that's happened to. But
Mm-hmm.
what about those of us who have just been living life and going on our path,
Mm-hmm.
and but there's something missing. We know that there's something missing. It doesn't feel radical, right? But what you're suggesting in radical ownership is a first step, right? Please say more
Mm-hmm.
about that for those of us that haven't been in extreme situations.
Well, I think the sense that there's something missing is, you know, people search for it through drugs. People search for it through different means, thinking that there's something outside of us that's going to complete us.
Mm,
And for me, it's not about looking outside, that there's nothing outside that's ever going to fill that hole within us, that sense of, you know, I'm lacking something or I'm missing something or in my life, there's more to life. And we can chase that through so many different means. And certainly they don't need to be as extreme, you know, they might just be obsessive traveling, like looking,
Mm,
place to place to place. If I go here, I'll be happy. If I go and climb this mountain, I'll be happy. But
yes.
really, it's only truly when we look inside and recognize that everything we've been looking for is already here within us in this present moment. And if I feel like I'm lacking love, like I'm not loved in some way, then it's up to us to take ownership and to look inside ourselves and to find that love. If we're looking outside and we're looking outside for somebody to make us feel safe or external conditions to give us a sense of safety, we'll never find it. It's only inside that we find safety within ourselves, that we develop a relationship with our body, our nervous system, our emotions, our breath, so that we can truly create that safety within us. And so for me, whatever we feel like we're missing, we need to look within ourselves to find.
Well, tell me about, what you're describing as a form of self-love,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you said if you feel like you're not loved. So I wanted to explore that just a little bit with you. So let's assume that you have taken radical ownership and you understand that love is within yourself and that
Mm-hmm.
that you come to love yourself despite all of your thoughts and faults and decisions and all of that. Where does
Mm-hmm.
loving someone else come into that? Because that's
Well,
an
I,
outside love.
well, I think when we find that love for ourselves, despite all the things that we've done to ourselves, all the things that we've done to other people, again, there's that ownership piece of the recognition that we haven't loved ourselves. That as much as other people may have done things to us in our lives that felt deeply challenging, that, oh, I can actually see, well, you know what? I've also done things that maybe weren't in my highest alignment or harmed other people. And so I think in that, we start to release the judgment that we have for ourselves. The judging that I should have done differently, I should have said something different. And when we find that freedom from judgment in ourselves, then we stop judging people outside and we can just recognize, well, this person is just acting from their level of consciousness based upon the life that they've lived, the experiences that they've lived. There's nothing else that they could do in this moment. They're playing their role in life perfectly, and they don't need me to fix them. They just need me to accept them as I've learned to accept myself. And in that, we create the space for other people to change.
And so I love where you're going with this. I love
Mhm,
I love the idea of self-love. I love the
mhm.
idea that is and with ownership and I want to talk about self-mastery because you mentioned that in a moment. What about this sounds like a very peaceful place. You seem like a very
Absolutely.
peaceful man. Yes.
Extremely.
So what happens when somebody really ticks you off? I mean, people do that, right?
Well, I've learned to look at my own triggers, and this is actually a good segue into self-mastery, is to, if somebody ticks me off, it's not to look outside and say, well, they did something wrong. It's to ask myself, why is this bothering me?
Right.
And I have a belief that we're co-creating our reality. and that the reality that we're experiencing is actually a projection of our internal state, that we're actually all co-dreaming this. And so we're each dreaming our own vision of our own expression of our internal world into this collective dream that we're having. And so all of the things that I haven't looked at within myself are going to be projected out into the world for me to look at, because there's aspects of our unconscious that we can't see, right? People call this the shadow, the shadow within us, the parts of ourselves that we've repressed. The only way that we get to see those are when they're displayed on this canvas of our life, this dream that we're collectively experiencing. And so for me, when I experience something or I have a challenging interaction that feels deeply triggering to me, then I ask myself, well, what is it within myself that's creating this situation? And again, it's taking ownership for every aspect of our life, every interaction, and recognizing, okay, well, this person has come to teach me something. And so my job in that moment is to center myself, to not
Mm-hmm.
lash out and to get revenge on that person that ticked me off,
Right.
because that's just going to perpetuate that inner shadow, that those inner unresolved aspects of ourselves. Might make us feel good or powerful in that moment, but I think you and I both know where that path goes.
Right.
And so it's all about deepening, for me, the connection to the body, the breath, our nervous system, being able to feel, okay, I feel triggered right now. I can feel that my nervous system is activated. My heart rate is elevated. My breathing has increased. I'm breathing more quickly. I can feel this activation. And it's up to me to own that and to be able to utilize tools such as the breath to anchor myself and to center myself and create presence and to get curious about what is presenting here, what is being offered here for me to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps it's somebody cuts us off in traffic and something as simple as that. And well, I actually don't need to react to that I actually have choice, that I can respond to that, and maybe every circumstance prior to that, when somebody's cut me off, maybe I finger that person or I honk my horn or whatever I do. But self-mastery is all about choice, and it's recognizing that we're choosing that response, that we're choosing that unconsciously, that we're reacting, and that we actually can create enough space to respond in a different way. And so we do that through presence, through connecting to our breath. And I find for me, the more I do this, the less that those circumstances show up in my life. Because I believe that all of these circumstances are arising for us to learn from. When we learn the lessons and we respond differently, then life unfolds differently.
Well, tell me how you get from radical ownership to self-mastery. I mean, you mentioned breathing and self-awareness and so forth, but that seems like self-mastery is a big it's a big aspiration.
It sounds like it
Yeah.
does. For me, radical ownership is about kind of taking this look at our outside circumstances and acknowledging and claiming that responsibility that, okay, like I'm creating all of this. And so self-mastery is about going inside and learning to master the forces and the impulses within us that continually create this reactionary nature that we're just reacting to life over and over. And it sounds like it is some grand thing, but it's not for, monks that are sitting in mountaintop caves or, yogis that have spent their whole lives, practicing in an ashram in India. For me, it's actually incredibly simple and easy and practical, and it's not complicated. I think that there's actually a part of us that's kind of addicted to this idea that it needs to be complicated. And it's kind of like it's an extension of the poor me. Like my
Right.
life is so hard. My problems are too big, they're unsolvable, but
Right.
it's not really that hard. You know,
Well, that's good
self-mastery is,
news. That's very good news.
and I often give an example and just kind of like walk through two different people, how they approach their day. And I think that really helps to illustrate for people how simple and easy it is. Would you like me to go through
Sure.
that? Yeah. So we could say that there's two men. We'll call one Ethan, we'll call the other one Liam. So Ethan wakes up in the morning, he's exhausted, he's hungover, his mind's racing. He dreads the day ahead of him. And he rolls over in bed, he grabs his phone, looks at his phone. First thing he sees is a message from his ex, and she's asking if he can go and pick the kids up an hour early. And he's like, oh my God, like, doesn't she know I work till 5? And so he fires off an angry text. Then he starts scrolling on his phone. He's looking at social media, he's looking at the news, and he's just kind of spiraling, like his energy is just all over the place. So he gets up out of bed, he's late because he's been on his phone. He grabs some Advil, slams it back with a cup of coffee. He's got news going on in the background that's just kind of blaring. It's just kind of like fueling this building frustration within him. So he takes off to go to work, and he's driving, he's in traffic. Somebody cuts him off, and he just flies into a rage, and so he's honking the horn and he's tailing this person, and all of a sudden he realizes, oh, it's, like this is an elderly person that looks just like my grandfather. And he's just like, oh my God, like what's going on? So he gets to work. His coworker didn't do something the night before that he was supposed to do. So he lashes out at his coworker, and he yells at him. And then he goes and he sits at his desk and he's like, oh my God, like, why is my life so hard? Like, why am I surrounded by these idiots? But his life is like a battlefield because he's constantly reacting to every situation, just based on impulse, and he's in reaction all the time. And for me, this is suffering, right? And
Mm-hmm.
suffering
That
is a
sounds like
choice.
suffering.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Liam wakes up in the morning and Liam feels really tired. His mind is racing. He's got lots of things to do, but he just takes a moment in bed. He doesn't grab his phone. He doesn't race out of bed to, go and get on with the day. He just takes a moment just to lie in bed and breathe. And he can feel the overwhelm. He can feel the exhaustion, but he decides that he's going to do his best to have a really good day. And so he gets up out of bed and he goes outside, puts his feet on the ground, feels the sun on his face, moves a little bit, maybe sits for a little bit, and he sets an intention, to just meet whatever happens in his day with a smile on his face and gratitude in his heart. So he goes inside, turns on his phone, gets a message from his girlfriend canceling dinner plans that they'd been looking forward to, for a long time. And, he feels angry, he feels disappointment, but he takes a minute just to feel that. And he recognizes, oh, okay, like this anger actually arises from me not giving myself space to cancel plans or to make boundaries when I need them. This disappointment is coming from my own lack of self-worth. So he takes a minute just to feel that. He's like, well, it's okay. I'm a good guy. I'm in a good relationship. So he sends his girlfriend a nice message, tells her to have a good day, tells her also how he felt. He said, well, I felt a little bit angry. I felt a little bit frustrated, but I understand, honey. I hope you have a great day. And he goes off to work and he feels good about himself because he knows how he might have reacted in the past. And so Liam, he's riding his bike to work and he almost gets run over. So he pulls over on the side of the road and he's just like his body is just, full of anger and stress and he's, like just super activated from this experience that he just had of almost getting run over. But again, he just stops, and instead of like chasing after the driver and, trying to, he's just takes a moment and he just feels all of that energy in his body, feels that anger, and he thinks, holy smokes, like I'm actually really lucky I didn't get run over because I was way too close to that car. So he breathes for a moment, kind of shakes it out, and then he gets back on his bike, goes on with his day, and he has a great day. And that's how simple it is. He's just taking the time to create a little bit of space, and he's also feeling whatever comes up, being curious about what comes up, and just taking that moment to center. We all breathe, right? And the breath for me is my anchor in life. It doesn't go anywhere. As long as we're alive, we've got our breath. And so when we learn to start to anchor to that, then we create space to feel so that we're not reacting, we're responding, we're choosing. And when we choose, then we get to create the life that we want. But if we're reacting, then we're the perpetual victim. Everything's always happening to us. We're living from the outside in, reacting to the outside and allowing that to impact our internal state, as opposed to living from the inside out and cultivating and prioritizing our inner state and recognizing that reflects on the way that my life unfolds.
So you just described something that you call conscious creator.
That leads into the conscious creator.
Okay.
Is when we take radical ownership, we recognize we're co-creating with life. Everything is unfolding for me. Everything is showing me something, providing me an opportunity, teaching me something. Self-mastery is about finding that center, being able to come into that conscious choice. And then when we do that and we remember who we are, as we were speaking to in the beginning, that I'm not just Jeff Sorensen. I'm not just a facilitator. When I was in jail, it wasn't identifying with being a criminal or, somebody who messed up in their life over and over again. It's like, no, I recognize that there's something more to me. And I also recognize that I am connected to all of life, that I'm part of something so much bigger, and I'm also having a unique experience. But it's an experience, and my story doesn't define me. The past doesn't define me. The roles that I give myself, they don't define me. When I recognize that I'm more than that, then I can tap into this creative potential to exercise my choice in life, to create consciously not just the life that I want to create, the life that's in service to life. So to me, this isn't, we hear about maybe conscious creation and manifestation, and oh, I want to manifest, the biggest house or $1 million or whatever it is. And to me, that's just more of following these reactionary shadow aspects of ourselves, trying to create fulfillment through external things, trying to create safety through external things. For me, being a conscious creator is about creating a life that will ripple through time. That long after we pass away, somebody will look back and say, wow, like that person was really somebody who made a difference in their life, that was courageous enough to face their own demons, and choose to heal those old wounds that maybe have been passed down generation to generation, and actually did something meaningful with their life. And so conscious creation for me is all about how can I not only create a beautiful life for myself, but how can I create a beautiful life that impacts the world around me in a positive way?
Well, thank you very much, Jeff, for these insights. Um, I can imagine the number of married couples who can benefit from. Are you married?
I'm not.
You're not
No.
married?
No.
Um, well, I'm not married either, but I have been married. And I can imagine the number of married couples who could benefit from a little self-mastery around you didn't take the garbage out. So wait a minute, I'm not going to respond to that. I'm just going to take the garbage out myself. And then I won't be
Absolutely.
mad about it.
Yeah. Well, and I think those relationships are our greatest mirrors. All our relationships, they're teaching us. And,
Yes, they do.
and so how can we appreciate that, be grateful for it, and learn the
Yes,
lessons?
absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing your story and your insights. We really, really appreciate it, Jeff.
It's been a joy to speak with you, Mary, and I hope people listening enjoyed it. And yeah, thank you again.
Thank you. You've been watching and listening to Experience Over Expectation, where we ask you to let go of the plan and live on your own terms. I'm Mary McCorvey.
You've been listening to Mary McCorvey's Experience Over Expectations podcast. Be sure to subscribe today on YouTube and Substack, or listen wherever you find your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in.